"You sure this thing's real?" The hotel clerk scoffed, holding a black metal card between her fingers like it might stain her skin. Her smirk curled as she added, "You don't exactly look like the type." Then, right there in the lobby, she let out a short, incredulous laugh. Not discreet, not professional, just loud enough for nearby guests to glance up, curious. Someone by the espresso bar chuckled. Another man in a golf shirt elbowed his friend. No one said a word, but the judgment in the room tightened like a noose. Still, the man she mocked didn't flinch. He simply looked at her, then down at the card. Solid, engraved, undeniable. The air felt thick, like everyone was waiting for a scene. But none came. No raised voice. No argument. Just one phone call. 12 words. Calm, direct, and final. "Cancel the merger. Call Raymond. Tell him it's over." She laughed at the card. She didn't know the man holding it. On the entire deal she just destroyed. The air inside the Lexington Tower didn't just smell like imported orchids and lemon polish. It smelled like expectation, a place where men in cufflinks traded glances worth millions, and the concierge already knew your name. Late spring in Dallas still carried warmth, but the heat that evening was all beneath the surface. Outside, a sleek black Escalade slid to a stop, its engine purring low as the rear door opened. Darius Train stepped out, the kind of man who made silence feel intentional. Tailored navy suit, polished brown Oxfords, no tie, just confidence that didn't need decoration. Behind him, his driver wheeled a matching luggage set with the kind of quiet efficiency reserved for people used to moving through the world unnoticed, until they decided not to be. Darius didn't look around for approval. He didn't need the chandeliers or gold trim to validate his presence. This wasn't his first five-star hotel, but today wasn't about comfort. Today was about closing, the final handshake in a 2-year dance with the Bentley Group, a $3.8 billion merger that would change everything. And all it required from Darius now was one night, one meeting, one signature. As Darius entered the lobby, the air shifted. Not because of temperature, but tone. It was the kind of change you couldn't point at, but you felt it crawl across your skin. Eyes turned, not all at once, but enough. A woman in pearls nudged her husband by the espresso bar. A man in a golf polo stared too long, then glanced away like he hadn't. No one said anything. They didn't need to. The message traveled in silence. What's he doing here? Darius had walked into rooms like this before, hundreds of times. Zurich, Johannesburg, Tokyo. He recognized the furnishings, the imported marble, the curated smell of opulence. But he also recognized that look, the one that measured your worth before you even spoke. He didn't blink. He didn't pause. He walked past the whispers, past the nods that weren't quite nods, and toward the front desk like he belonged there. Because he did. The clerk barely glanced up. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with a tight ponytail and gum she chewed like it was personal. Checking in, she asked, voice flat. "Yes," Darius replied, offering a quiet smile. "Reservation under Darius Train." The clerk tapped on her keyboard without looking up again. Darius glanced around, taking in the space with detached familiarity. Everything about the Lexington Tower tried to whisper elegance. The chandelier, the silent pianist in the corner, even the citrus in the air. But beneath the gloss was something else. The kind of cold that had nothing to do with air conditioning. A cold you felt when you were being watched, evaluated, and quietly dismissed. "All right, Mr. Train," the clerk said eventually. "I'll need a credit card and ID." Darius nodded once and reached for his wallet. Inside, a matte black Centurion card. Solid metal. No number printed. No limit assigned. Not something you applied for, but something you were invited to hold. You placed it gently on the counter. For a moment, silence. Then she laughed. Not a chuckle, not a polite mistake. A real laugh. Sharp, disbelieving. "Oh wow," she said, smirking. "You carry one of these around?" Her tone dripped with amusement, like he'd slid her a poker chip from a Vegas novelty store. She looked up, eyes scanning his face, searching for the punchline. Darius didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, calm and unshaken, letting the moment hang there. It wasn't the first time someone questioned his place. Wasn't even 100th. But something about the way she smirked, the casual boldness in her mockery, made this moment feel heavier. Behind him, a low chuckle surfaced. Someone else had been watching. He didn't need to turn. No, it came from the man in the plaid golf shirt. The sound was subtle, but it cut like glass. Darius returned his gaze to the clerk, who now tapped the card on the counter, like it might crack open and reveal the trick. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice smooth, level. She shrugged, still amused. "No, just haven't seen many of these. Usually it's, executives." The pause before that last word said everything. Executives, but not like you. Not dressed like you. Not with your skin, your presence. And just like that, the air wasn't just cold anymore. It was sharp. Something had shifted, and Darius felt it clearly. But he didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He simply reached for his phone. The phone was already in his hand before she noticed. Darius unlocked it with a swipe, pressed a single contact, and lifted it to his ear. No theatrics, no anger, just a quiet call that turned the floor beneath her feet to glass. "Yeah," he said into the phone. "It's me. No, don't go in yet. Cancel the room block. And call Raymond. Tell him the merger's off." The words floated out, calm as water, but they hit like thunder. For a moment, the clerk didn't react. Her brain needed time to catch up, like she thought it was a bluff or some kind of joke. But the voice on the other end replied, muffled and serious, the whole thing. Darius's answer came instantly, steady. Every inch of it. He ended the call without looking at her, then gently picked up the Centurion card from the counter and slid it back into his wallet. "I'll find somewhere else to stay," he said, quietly but firmly. Then he turned, took hold of his luggage handle, and walked out, leaving only silence and stares behind him. She didn't call after him. She didn't move. She just stood there, suddenly unsure what she'd just done. At the far end of the lobby, just behind a marble column near the business center, Kelsey Durham had been watching, a system manager, trained to read a room before breaks. But this time she was too slow. The man in the navy suit, the one who moved like silence was his language, was already gone, and all that was left was the cold echo of something irreversible. She rushed toward the front desk. "What just happened?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. Megan, the clerk, twirled her pen with a shrug. "Just some guy tried to check in with a fake Centurion or something. Got all weird when I asked about it." Kelsey narrowed her eyes. "Fake? Are you sure?" "Looked fake," Megan replied. "Those things aren't real unless you're like super high up, right?" He didn't even look like. She trailed off. Kelsey didn't respond. She just pulled out her tablet and began typing. Within seconds, a guest profile popped up. Darius Coltrane, platinum status, founder and CEO of Lucent Applied Technologies, net worth rumored to be over $1 billion. Her throat tightened. She turned the screen to Megan. That car was real, and he was the reason this entire weekend was sold out. Megan blinked at the screen, her posture stiffening as the title so burned into her eyes. "Wait, seriously," she whispered. Kelsey's voice stayed controlled, but her jaw was tight. He was leading the Bentley merger, the one that was supposed to bring nearly $30 million in long-term contracts to our chain over the next 3 years. Megan stared at her like the words were in another language. But he didn't even say who he was. He didn't need to, Kelsey snapped. He didn't ask. He didn't verify. He laughed. Megan's lips parted, but no words came. The weight of her mistake began to land, slow and suffocating. "He just made a phone call and left," she muttered, like it was nothing. "It wasn't nothing," Kelsey replied. "It was everything." Without waiting for more, she turned and walked briskly toward the elevators, already preparing for the internal storm about to hit. Behind her, Megan stood frozen at the desk, the laughter drained from her face. For the first time, the lobby felt unfamiliar. The marble, the gold trim, the chandeliers, they all fell hollow. because power had just exited the building, and it hadn't slammed the door. It had locked it behind itself. Near the bell station, Andre, one of the longest-serving bellhops at the Lexington, had seen everything unfold from a careful distance. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but now, as the silence thickened and Megan fidgeted with a pen that no longer spun with confidence, he finally stepped forward. "You know," he said softly, "that man, he didn't storm out. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice." Megan looked at him, unsure whether to defend herself or stay silent. He walked out like someone who knew exactly how much the room cost and how little it meant to him. Andre paused, then added, "People blow up over towels." He didn't even blink. She didn't respond, but the unease in her eyes said enough. The judgment had turned inward now. Around them, the lobby had grown quiet, unusually so. The usual hum of clinking glasses, hushed check-ins, and elevator dings felt suspended in midair, as if the entire building had paused to process what just happened. Darius's voice hadn't echoed, but his silence did. It filled the space like a warning. Not loud, just absolute. And in that quiet, something far more powerful had just been said. On the top floor of the Lexington, in a penthouse suite dressed in walnut panels and silk rugs, 3 executives from the Bentley Group were going over last-minute prep. Howard Lynn, the COO, nursed a club soda while reviewing slides. Trina Mendez, general counsel, typed furiously on her tablet, and Dev Shah, the CFO, leaned back, tie loosened, try to breathe before the morning storm. None of them expected a knock, and certainly not the look on Kelsey Durham's face when she stepped inside. "We have a serious problem," she said, skipping any pleasantries. Howard looked up, blinking. "What kind of problem?" "Mr. Coltrane," she said. "He left. Cancelled his reservation." "Cancel?" Dev asked, already sitting up. "Where'd he go?" "He didn't say," Kelsey replied. "But he also cancelled the merger." Trina's fingers froze on her keyboard. Howard stood. "What happened?" "An incident at check-in," Kelsey said carefully. The clerk mocked his card in front of guests. The silence in the room shifted from shock to calculation. Dev exhaled sharply. "You're telling me the man leading a multi-billion-dollar deal was humiliated in our lobby?" "Yes," Kelsey said. And with that, everything changed. Howard ran a hand through his thinning hair, pacing now. "Do you realize what kind of signal this sends? We invite the architect of this entire deal, and he walks in just to be insulted at the front desk." Trina shook her head, already opening a new document titled Crisis Memo. "This isn't just bad. This is catastrophic. PR will eat us alive. You think loosened stakeholders are going to be quiet about this?" Dev stood near the window, staring out, thinking faster than he could speak. "He's not the kind of man who looks for headlines," he said finally. "He doesn't need them. But his silence speaks louder than any press release will ever write." Kelsey stayed silent, watching their panic manifest in different ways. Anger, calculation, denial. Howard turned back to her. "Did you try to stop him?" "By the time I got to the lobby, he was already gone." Dev exhaled again, and now we're left holding a $3.8 billion crater and no idea how deep it goes. Trina looked down at her screen. One clerk, one laugh. That's all it took. And now our leverage is gone. The weight of those words was absolute. Darius didn't go far, just across the street, to a quiet boutique hotel called the Bishop House. No chandeliers, no fake smiles, no valet who guessed your name. Just a room with a bed and respect at the front desk. That was enough. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the black card still resting in his palm. Heavy, solid, once a symbol of arrival. Now just another trigger. The call he'd made earlier was already moving through Lucent like electricity. Raymond would handle it. The stakeholders would get their answer in silence. Darius didn't build Lucent by accident. He had started with a laptop, a second-hand ThinkPad, in a shared office space in Tulsa. He coded through the night, pitching by day, building a logistics system no one saw coming. By 47, he wasn't just a billionaire. He was the invisible force behind the movement of goods across 4 continents. But tonight, with a metal card in his hand and judgment still clinging to the air like smoke, none of that seemed to matter. Because some things don't change. Not with money, not with power, not even with global influence. Some things follow you, quietly, waiting for moments like this. His phone buzzed. Raymond, need me to come to you? Darius typed back, no, just handle the numbers. I'm done talking. Another buzz. This time Camille, his sister in Tulsa, heard he pulled the plug. You good? He stared at the message, fingers hovering, thought about replying, thought about telling her what he really felt, that after all the years, all the awards, all the rooms he'd earned his way into, one smirk from a hotel clerk still had the power to reduce it all. That no matter how many commas sat in your bank account, some people only see your skin first. But instead he wrote, yeah, just tired. Camille responded with a single line, get some rest, and don't let this turn you cold. He set the phone down, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling. The ache wasn't sharp, it was old, lived in, the kind of hit in your bones until someone poked it again. Like that professor in college who once asked, not about his grades, but who was paying for them. Not curiosity, just disbelief. Smart, black, present, it didn't compute. Not then. And even now, with a jet and $1 billion empire, the test still came. Just fancier hallways. Same questions. A knock came at the door. Darius opened it to find a young man in a hotel vest holding a tray with 2 water bottles and a small plate of fruit. Compliments of the manager, sir. The boy said, trying to keep his voice steady. He saw your name on the lock. Just wanted to say we're honored you chose to stay here. Darius nodded, accepting the tray. Thank you. The boy hesitated, then added, also my dad works in tech. He talks about your company all the time. Said you built something no one else even thought of. That gave Darius pause. What's your name? Jaden. Well, Jaden, tell your dad I said thank you. The boy smiled, nodded once, and disappeared down the hallway. Darius closed the door and turned toward the window, where the Lexington towers still stood across the street, tall and gleaming like nothing had happened. But everything had. They hadn't just lost a guest or a deal. They'd lost the lesson. And this time, the silence wouldn't stay small, because power doesn't need a microphone. It needs movement. And that movement had already begun. Quiet, steady, undeniable. By 8:17 a.m., the Lexington's top floor should have been buzzing with last-minute prep. Coffee carts rolling, nameplates aligning, assistants whispering through earpieces. Instead, the boardroom was still. Empty chairs surrounded a pristine walnut table. Trays of untouched pastries sat beside unopened water bottles. Not a single Lucent rep had arrived. Not even Darius's assistant. Down the hall, Dev Shaw stood frozen, phone in hand. He read the message out loud, voice flat. Effective immediately, Lucent Applied Technologies is withdrawing all interest in a Bentley merger. Will not be rescheduling. The matter is closed. Trina dropped into a chair, her screen still glowing with unread emails. That's it, she said. Howard didn't speak. His eyes were locked on the untouched presentation deck in front of him. Months, years of work obliterated in seconds. No statement, no chance to explain, he muttered. He doesn't owe us anything. Trina replied. Not after what happened yesterday. Dev leaned forward. The deal's dead, and the fallout's coming fast. Our shareholders will panic. The media will pick this up by noon. And they would, because silence this intentional always makes noise. And this time, it wasn't just business. It was a message, one the world was about to hear. 10 blocks away at the Bishop House, Darius sat across from Raymond in a quiet lounge, the kind with velvet chairs and soft jazz floating overhead. Raymond had just come from a morning of phone calls and damage control, but nothing could reverse what had already been set in motion. They're scrambling, he said. You pulled the plug before they could even write an apology. Darius took a sip of tea. Good. Raymond hesitated, then leaned forward. You sure you don't want this on record? Without a press statement. They're gonna shape the story themselves. Darius didn't blink. Let them. We'll say what we need to, when we need to. Raymond nodded, but his voice dropped. You know, we just lost a massive infrastructure extension. That merger would have tripled our south-based manufacturing. Darius met his eyes. I know. So this isn't personal. Darius's tone didn't waver. It is personal, and it's business. Raymond didn't argue. Instead, he opened a news tab on his tablet. They're already running with it. Blogs, forums, early headlines. One post reads, "The Black Card Backlash. Did racism just kill a Histortech deal?" Darius didn't flinch. The truth had already started doing the talking. Back at the Lexington, panic had a seat at every table. The HR conference room was tense, blinds half closed, fluorescent lights humming. Megan sat stiffly across from Susan Tremble, the regional director of guest experience and a corporate attorney who had flown in overnight. "I didn't mean anything by it," Megan said, voice shaking slightly. "He handed me this weird metal card. I didn't think it was real." Susan didn't blink. "You thought a man with a confirmed reservation, wearing a tailored suit, was pretending. I didn't know who he was," Megan replied, eyes darting. "He didn't say." The attorney spoke for the first time. "Did you ask? Did you request alternative verification? Did you treat him like any other platinum guest?" Megan had no answer. Susan's voice dropped. "You mocked him. In front of witnesses." Silence. Then the lawyer added, "We're facing a brand-level problem. This is no longer about one guest. It's about systemic perception." Megan's face paled. "So what happens now?" Susan stood slowly. "He's not coming back, and neither is the deal. Whatever happens to you, that's just the start." She walked out without another word. The message was clear. The storm had landed, and it wasn't leaving quietly. By Friday afternoon, the story was no longer just rumor. It was wildfire. Not from Darius. He hadn't posted. He hadn't said a single word publicly, but someone else had. An anonymous Twitter account posted a thread titled, "A Black CEO was laughed at while using his own card." The next morning, he killed a $3.8 billion deal. No clickbait, no drama, just bullet points, timestamps, and screenshots. It ended with one line: "Power doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it just walks away." Within 3 hours, the post had over 2.4 million views. People started sharing their own stories in stores, airports, restaurants, moments when they were treated as less. Darius's silence had cracked something open. At the Bishop House, Raymond burst into the lounge, phone in hand. "You've seen this." He played a clip from a morning talk show. "This isn't about a card. This is about being dismissed. If this happens to a billionaire, what do you think happens to the rest of us?" Darius watched, quiet. Raymond looked at him. "You still want to stay silent?" Darius gave a slight nod. "Already spoke," he said, "when I walked out, and let the world feel what I didn't say." Inside the Lexington, chaos had officially taken root. Crisis meetings ran back to back. Legal teams drafted statements and redlined them minutes later. One thread in a corporate email read, "This is escalating into a brand-wide liability." Megan had been removed from her shift, pending investigation. HR fumbled through protocol, while front desk staff whispered about who might be next. But what hit hardest wasn't just the financial tremor. It was a Facebook post. Andre, the quiet bellhop who'd seen it all, wrote a short message after his shift. "I've worked here for 6 years. I've seen celebrities, athletes, CEOs, but I've never seen a man walk out the way Darius Coltrane did. Graceful, silent, powerful. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just made one call and walked out like someone who knew his worth." The post ended simply. "That's the kind of power you don't learn in school." It went viral within hours. Comments flooded in, stories from strangers who'd been dismissed, ignored, humiliated. Darius's moment became everyone's moment, and in every comment, one line echoed. He didn't need to say a word. He let the world speak for him. At the Lexington, no PR team could compete with that kind of truth. That evening, Darius sat alone in his room at the Bishop House. The lights dimmed, the hum of the city faint behind closed windows. The TV played on mute, a news anchor reading his name from a teleprompter while footage from an old tech summit flashed on screen. His photo hovered in the corner, composed, sharp, unmistakably in control. A headline below read, CEO cancels $3.8 billion merger after alleged hotel incident. Alleged, supposed, reportedly. All the words they used when they weren't ready to admit the truth. Darius muted the screen entirely, then checked his phone. A new message from Camille. You just made the news. Attached was a screenshot from a local news segment. Camille followed up. You said it better than any headline could. Darius stared at the photo of himself on the screen, shoulders squared, jaw set. Not because he was angry, but because he'd learned long ago that stillness carried its own gravity. He replied, they never listen right the first time anyway. Camille, true. But this time, I think they heard you. Darius leaned back in his chair, not smiling, not triumphant, just ready, because tomorrow, he wouldn't whisper, he would speak, and the industry would feel it. Saturday morning arrived, without ceremony. No cameras, no press, no suited entourage. Just Darius, in a navy sweater and jeans, stepping quietly into a modest community center on the south side of Dallas. It was a mentoring session scheduled months ago. Small crowd, mostly local business students and interns. After the hotel fallout, he nearly canceled, not because he was afraid, but because he didn't want to bring the firestorm into a room full of hopefuls. But the organizer called him and said, they don't need the headlines. They need you. So he showed up, folding chairs, notepads, a few phones set discreetly to record. He stood behind a plain podium, hands steady. I was asked to speak about leadership. He began, voice calm, eyes clear. But I want to talk about power. The room stilled. Some people think power is about volume, how loud you are, how hard you can hit. But real power is knowing who you are. It's walking away from a table where you're not respected. It's letting the silence speak for you. He paused. No one moved. Sometimes, leaving is the most powerful thing you can do. And for the first time, the silence felt holy, not hollow. Darius looked out over the rows of students, their eyes locked on him. I've been mistaken for security in my own building. I've had investors ask if I was part of the engineering team. I've been called humble for speaking clearly, but none of that defines me. He stepped forward slightly. They don't get to decide your value. They don't write your story. You do. Murmurs of agreement swept the room. And let me be clear, he said, I didn't cancel that deal because I was angry. I canceled it because values matter more than numbers. Because if someone laughs at your presence, they'll never respect your partnership. And if you allow quiet disrespect, it only gets louder. You let that land. Walk with dignity, even when it hurts. Especially then, and when they question if you belong at the table. Remind them, you are the table. The room erupted in quiet applause. Afterward, people approached one by one. Some shook his hand, others simply nodded. Then a young woman in a mustard hoodie stepped up. My dad's a janitor, she said. He watched your story, and he said you walked away like a king. Darius smiled, voice low. Tell your dad. He raised someone brave. That evening, Darius sat alone in his corner office at Lucent headquarters. The skyline stretched beyond the glass, bathed in warm amber light. His shoes were off, feet resting on the edge of the desk, fingers tracing the edge of his phone. It buzzed again, Camille. You said it better than any of the news did. He smiled faintly, typing back. They never listen right the first time anyway. She replied, true, but this time I think they heard you. The sun dipped lower, and the city lights blinked awake. In that moment, Darius wasn't reflecting on the merger, the billions, or the headlines. He was thinking about the pause, the stillness between insult and response. How he'd once believed that silence meant surrender, but now he understood silence, when chosen, was strategy. He didn't need to scream, didn't need to destroy. All he had to do was walk away, with precision, with purpose, and let the vacuum speak volumes, because the world doesn't always learn from noise. Sometimes it needs silence to echo long enough for the truth to land, and this time it had. From the drawer beside him, Darius pulled out an old manila folder. Inside were fragments of the road that had led him here, not trophies, reminders. The first photo was him and his dad, grease on both their shirts, standing outside the garage in Oklahoma where his journey began. The second, a clipping from the local paper, Lucent Land's $1 million contract. His face in the picture was younger, sharper, full of that fire people mistake for ambition, but is really just survival. Then at the bottom, an envelope, yellowed at the corners. Inside, the rejection letter for a state scholarship he'd earned 10 times over. He still remembered holding it on the front porch, his mom beside him, saying, "This road won't be straight, but it's still yours." He didn't keep that letter for revenge. He kept it for clarity, for every room that made him invisible, for every handshake they skipped, for every glance that said "not you," because when they look at a black man and see a question mark, what they're really seeing is a threat to their assumptions. Darius had never tried to make them comfortable. He'd only ever asked for space. And when they didn't give it, he built his own table. Darius unlocked his phone and opened a new message to Camille. He typed, paused, deleted, then typed again. "You were right. That moment didn't turn me cold. It just reminded me I never stop fighting. Some people throw punches. I write checks." He didn't send it, just let it sit there on the screen, blinking like a thought he was still choosing whether to speak aloud. He looked back out over the city. Dallas hadn't changed. The lights still glittered. The skyline still reached. But something inside him had shifted, not because of a laugh at a front desk, but because of what that laugh represented. It wasn't about ego. It was about erosion, the slow chipping away that comes with being doubted over and over and over again. And yet here he was, not louder, just heavier. And that weight, that presence was enough. His mother once told him, "You don't need revenge, baby. You need reflection. Let them see themselves in your silence." And now the world had. They saw what they did. And more importantly, they saw what he didn't do in return. No press tour, no public tears. Just one man, walking out, with grace, dignity, and the door locked behind him. By Sunday morning, the story wasn't just trending. It had become something more. Not a scandal, not a headline, a mirror. And people were staring into it, some for the first time. Twitter threads multiplied, each more personal than the last. Comments flooded in from teachers, nurses, delivery drivers, architects. Stories of being passed over, laughed at, questioned, told in quiet shame, until Darius made silence powerful. He hadn't tweeted, hadn't posted a thing, but that only made the movement louder. One comment stood out. "This isn't about a billionaire. This is about my brother who was told to stand at the back, my daughter who was asked who she was shopping for, my husband who was mistaken for the valet." The post ended with, "He didn't speak for us. He reminded us we could speak for ourselves." And that was the legacy, not the canceled deal, not the viral moment, but the shift, the quiet tilt of dignity reclaimed. Back in his office, Darius finally stood, stretched, and shut the folder. No dramatic exit, no speech prepared, because sometimes the most powerful statement is presence, and sometimes the most unforgettable sound comes from a man who walks away without making one.